Imagine a state famous for its grey rain and gloomy skies being the place that produces the vast majority of an entire nation's apples. Not in lush, damp orchards, but in the middle of an arid desert scorched by the sun for more than 300 days a year. It sounds like a geographical mistake, but that's the truth about Washington, a state most people think they know. And that very misunderstanding is what's most fascinating. Washington isn't the state of dreary clouds and rain. Washington is a world split in two by a mountain range, carved out by catastrophic ice age floods, shaped by breathing volcanoes, and transformed by the peculiar decisions of humans. Every mountain, every river, every valley here tells a story. And that story begins millions of years ago when tectonic plates collided beneath the ocean floor. So, what really created Washington? Why can a single mountain range completely divide the culture, politics, and economy of a state? And why is a land that seems so peaceful sitting on top of one of America's most dangerous natural threats? The answer lies in geography. It's always geography. If you look at a map of the US, West Coast, you'll see Washington in the top left corner, bordering Canada to the north and Oregon to the south. At a glance, it seems like an ordinary state, almost square-shaped, nothing special. But when you look closer, you'll see something no other state in the US has, a near-perfect natural boundary running from north to south, splitting everything within it. That is the Cascade Range, a chain of massive volcanoes running through the middle of the state like a giant wall built by nature to separate two completely different worlds. To the west of the Cascades is one of the wettest regions in the United States. It rains so much that people get used to living with it like a constant companion. Vast forests, major tech cities, bustling seaports. East of the Cascades is another world entirely. Dry, hot, barren, vast fields, small towns, and a way of life completely different from their counterparts to the west. The same state, the same sky, but two completely separate realities. And it all starts with the wind. As warm, moist air from the Pacific Ocean blows onto the west coast, it hits the Cascade Range like a barrier. The air is forced upward, it cools, and it dumps all its moisture on the western slopes in the form of rain. A lot of rain, so much that some valleys here receive over 3.5 meters of rainfall each year. By the time the air crosses the peaks and descends to the east, it's almost completely dry. The result is a vast semi-desert lying right behind a temperate rainforest. It sounds impossible, but that is Washington. The only temperate rainforest in the continental United States is located right on the Olympic Peninsula in the state's northwest corner. This isn't an ordinary forest. This is the Hoh rainforest, where sunlight has to filter through multiple canopies of giant trees and thick layers of moss covering every surface. Sitka spruce and western hemlock trees grow so tall you have to crane your neck back just to see their tops. Everything is draped in a layer of lush green moss like a giant blanket. This place exists for one single reason: the Olympic Mountains, a majestic range right on the coast, standing like a wall against the winds from the Pacific. The wind brings in moisture. It's blocked by the mountains, and the rain pours down year after year for thousands of years. And so a rainforest was born in a temperate zone. But there's something even stranger about the Olympic Peninsula. It's home to the westernmost point of the entire continental United States. Not California, not Oregon, but a small cape named Cape Flattery, hidden within Olympic National Park. To get there, you have to hike nearly 5 kilometers through old growth forest on a boardwalk trail. When you reach the coast, you stand on sheer cliffs looking down at the Pacific Ocean. In the distance are lonely sea stacks and enormous piles of driftwood tossed ashore by the waves. There's nothing else between you and Japan. It's America's final western frontier. And most Americans don't know that. The land east of the Cascades holds a completely different secret. If you fly over this region and look down, you'll see a landscape unlike any other on Earth. Giant scars clawed into the earth, deep, waterless canyons, dry waterfalls 5 times wider than Niagara Falls, and not a single drop of water has flowed over them for thousands of years. This is the channeled Scablands, the torn apart land, and its story begins with a natural catastrophe so immense that geologists at first refused to believe it was real. Tens of thousands of years ago, during the last ice age, a giant ice dam formed in what is now Idaho. Behind that dam was glacial Lake Missoula, a massive glacial lake that held as much water as Lake Erie and Lake Ontario combined. Then the dam broke. It didn't just crack, it shattered completely and suddenly. A wall of water hundreds of meters high rushed across Washington at highway speeds, but with a volume dozens of times greater than all the rivers on Earth combined. The water didn't flow over this land. It tore it apart. The fertile topsoil was completely stripped away. The basalt bedrock beneath was scoured away, carving deep canyons, parallel grooves, and massive basins. And then the water receded, leaving behind a landscape that looked like the surface of Mars. What's even more incredible is that this didn't happen just once. It happened dozens of times. The ice dam would melt, the lake would fill, the ice dam would reform, and then it would break again. The floods repeated over thousands of years, each one carving deeper into the landscape until it created one of the strangest terrains on the planet. When geologist J. Harlan Bretz first proposed the theory of these cataclysmic floods in the 1920s, his colleagues laughed and dismissed him because no one wanted to believe that nature could do something so terrible. But nature in Washington doesn't just act through water, it also acts through fire. Washington sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of volcanoes and earthquakes that encircles the world's largest ocean. Just off the coast of Washington, a tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca is constantly sliding underneath the North American plate. This isn't a gentle process. This is millions of tons of rock being forced deep into the earth, melting into magma and being pushed to the surface through the volcanoes of the Cascade Range. Washington has 5 active volcanoes: Mount Baker, Glacier Peak, Mount Rainier, Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens. And all of them could erupt. From a distance, Mount Rainier looks like a dream. Its peak is covered in brilliant white snow, majestic and silent. But behind that beauty lies one of America's greatest geological dangers. Rainier is over 4,300 meters high and holds 28 major glaciers, more than all the other Cascade volcanoes combined. These glaciers are a vital water source for the region during the dry summer. But they are also a ticking time bomb. Geothermal heat from the volcano's core is constantly weakening the rock within. If a major earthquake strikes, or if the volcano awakens, that enormous amount of ice could melt in a matter of hours. Water, mud, and rock mix to form a flow called a lahar, which would pour down the valleys below at terrifying speeds. And in those valleys below are cities where hundreds of thousands of people live. Tacoma, Auburn, Puyallup, densely populated communities that lie directly in the path of a potential lahar. Scientists know this, the government knows this, but most people continue to live there because Mount Rainier is beautiful and because the danger seems too distant to worry about every day. Mount St. Helens was proof that a volcano's silence is only temporary. On May 18th, 1980, at 8:32 a.m., an earthquake triggered the collapse of St. Helens' north face. It was the largest landslide in recorded history, and as soon as the mountainside fell away, the pressure inside was released. A lateral blast ripped through the air with the force of thousands of atomic bombs. The column of smoke and ash rose more than 20 kilometers high. Over 200 square miles of forest were wiped out in seconds. 480 million tons of rock were displaced, and the summit, once over 2,950 meters high, was suddenly gone. The mountain blew off 800 meters of its own height in less than a minute. 57 people were killed, the Toutle River was blocked and rerouted, a vast area became a wasteland of ash, and the topographical maps of Washington had to be redrawn. Even human decisions are shaped by geography in the strangest ways. In 1846, the United States and Great Britain agreed to divide the Pacific Northwest with a straight line along the 49th parallel. Simple and neat on a map. but no one checked how that line intersected the actual terrain. And the result is a strange mistake that still exists today. The Sarwassan Peninsula juts south, crossing the 49th parallel. The border cuts across the tip of the peninsula, leaving a small piece of land to the south that belongs to the US, completely surrounded by Canadian territory on 3 sides and the sea on the 4th. That is Point Roberts, Washington, an American territory completely cut off from the rest of the country. To get from Point Roberts to the rest of Washington by land, you have to cross 2 international border checkpoints and drive through about 40 kilometers of Canadian land. Children there who want to attend middle school in the US have to carry a passport every day. The nearest hospital is on the Canadian side, and it's all because of a line drawn on a map in Washington, D.C. by people who had never set foot here. And that's not even the strangest thing geography has caused in this border region. In 1859, a pig that was shot and killed nearly sparked a war between the United States and Great Britain. When the border along the 49th parallel was drawn, the treaty stipulated that the boundary would pass through the middle of the channel, separating Vancouver Island from the mainland. The problem was, there were 2 navigable channels, and the San Juan Islands lay right in the middle of that disputed territory. Both the United States and Britain claimed sovereignty. Both American farmers and Britain's Hudson's Bay Company had settled there. And so the situation simmered with tension, until an American farmer named Lyman Cutler saw a pig eating potatoes in his garden. He took his gun and shot it. That pig belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company. It seemed like a small thing, but it became the trigger. Britain demanded Cutler be arrested and put on trial. The US refused and sent troops to protect him. Britain sent warships into the San Juan waters. For a time, both sides had their guns aimed at each other on a small island in the Pacific. The standoff lasted for 12 years. In the end, international arbitration awarded the San Juan Islands to the United States in 1872, and the only casualty of the entire conflict was the pig. Geography doesn't just cause disputes. Sometimes it forces people to be creative in ways no one would expect. Puget Sound is a complex network of inlets, peninsulas, islands, and fjords carved into the mainland by ancient glaciers. As Seattle began to expand eastward, people needed to connect the city with the suburbs on the other side of Lake Washington, a deep, wide lake with a thick, soft mud bottom. Building a traditional pillar bridge was impossible because there was no solid ground to anchor the foundations. So, engineers came up with a solution unlike any other in the world. A floating bridge. Instead of pillars buried in the lake bed, they built enormous, completely watertight concrete boxes, floated them on the lake surface, and anchored them in place. Those concrete boxes float, carrying the roadway on top. The bridge doesn't stand on the ground. The bridge hovers on the water, and it works perfectly. Today, Washington is home to 4 of the 5 longest floating bridges in the world, with the State Route 520 bridge holding the record at over 2,350 metres long. It's not because Washingtonians love a technological challenge, it's because geography gave them no other choice. And geography also determined where America chose to create its first atomic weapons. During World War II, the Manhattan Project needed a location to produce plutonium. They didn't choose randomly. They looked at a map and searched for 3 things: a large water source to cool the reactors, a massive power supply, and a desolate, isolated wasteland large enough to be separated from the population. Washington provided all 3. The Columbia River supplied the cooling water. The Grand Coulee Dam, the largest hydroelectric dam in the United States, had just been completed and provided a nearly limitless supply of electricity. And the arid desert near the town of Hanford provided the isolated space that no one wanted to be near. Overnight, the government cleared an entire area of over 1,500 square kilometres. Thousands of workers poured in, the first nuclear reactors were built, and the plutonium produced at Hanford was used in the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki, ending World War II. But the cost was enormous. Today, Hanford is the most heavily contaminated nuclear site in the Western Hemisphere. Millions of litres of radioactive waste still sit in leaking underground concrete tanks near the Columbia River. And cleaning up the site, if it's even possible, will cost hundreds of billions of dollars and last until the end of this century. All of that began with a river, a dam, and a desert. The Grand Coulee Dam didn't just serve the war effort, it completely transformed an entire region. When the dam was completed in the 1940s, it generated more electricity than any other structure in the United States. The cheap electricity that flooded the Pacific Northwest attracted large aluminum plants to settle there. Cheap aluminum spurred Boeing to expand its aircraft production in Seattle. And Boeing's airplanes helped the American military dominate the skies in World War II. A single dam on a river in the Washington desert influenced the outcome of a world war. That is the chain of cause and effect that geography creates. The dam also did something else. It pumped water up from the Columbia, feeding it into a complex network of canals that spread across more than 200,000 hectares of desert land in eastern Washington. The soil here is volcanic basalt, rich in minerals. With more than 300 days of sunshine a year, if it has enough water, it can grow almost anything. And Washington's farmers chose apples. Today, Washington produces about 60% of the entire United States apple crop, not from the lush, damp gardens in the West, but from orchards stretching across land that your geographical instincts would tell you is impossible to farm. This is what happens when people decide not to abide by the limits set by geography, but instead use one geography to conquer another. And even the state's name is the result of a strangely flawed geographical decision. When the residents of the Pacific Northwest wanted to separate from the Oregon Territory and form their own territory in 1853, they wanted to name it Columbia after the Great Columbia River that runs through the region. It was a logical name, reflecting the geographical reality of the land. But a congressman from Kentucky objected. He argued that a territory named Columbia would be confused with the District of Columbia, that is, Washington, D.C. So, he proposed naming it Washington in honor of the first president. Congress agreed. And the result, a state of Washington on the west coast and a Washington, D.C. on the east coast, creating the very confusion the congressman wanted to avoid. The mistake they tried to prevent became the mistake they created. Today, Washington remains a state of paradoxes. The West is a hub of global technology. Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing, names that shape the world economy, all have their origins or headquarters here. Seattle is one of the cities with the highest living standards and incomes in America. Progressive culture, left-leaning politics and urban mindset. The East is a completely different world. Farmers, small communities, conservative politics, an economy based on land and natural resources. These two worlds don't just differ in lifestyle, they differ in their views on government, on taxes, on the role of the state. And the boundary between those two worlds is precisely the Cascade Range, a mountain range that creates the weather, creates the economy, creates the culture, and divides political ideologies. That is the power of geography. Washington's ferry system is also a direct consequence of the geography of Puget Sound. Because the deep, long inlets couldn't be effectively bridged by conventional means, the state built a massive ferry system that functions like a network of marine highways. Each year, this system transports more than 20 million passengers and over 10 million vehicles. This is the largest and busiest ferry system in the US, and it exists solely because geography allows for no other solution. And beneath all those modern achievements, Seattle hides a little-known history in the most literal sense. When Seattle was first built, its central business district was located right on the low-lying tidal flats of Elliott Bay. The land here was so low that every time the tide came in, water flooded the streets. The drainage systems ran backward, and urban sanitation became a nightmare for everyone living there. Then in 1889, a great fire burned down almost the entire downtown area, which was made of wood. Instead of rebuilding it just as it was, city engineers realized this was an opportunity to correct the original geographical mistake. They built retaining walls along the streets and filled in the land behind them, raising the street level by 10 to 30 feet. The ground floors of the old buildings suddenly became basements, and a network of underground tunnels, rooms, and corridors was born beneath the modern city. Today, you can take a tour of the Seattle Underground, walking through the remnants of the old city that lie beneath Seattle's sidewalks. It's history, literally, lying beneath your every step. Washington is a reminder that nothing in this world is random. Rain falls in the west because mountains block the wind. Apples grow in the east because a dam brings water where nature refused to. Engineers build floating bridges because the lake is too deep for conventional ones. A town is stuck between two borders because someone drew a straight line without looking at the actual terrain. And above it all, the volcanoes remain silent. Mount Rainier still stands there, beautiful and dangerous, snow-capped above the populous cities. The rock inside it is being eroded daily by geothermal heat. Scientists know that it will erupt again. It's not a matter of if, but when. The only question is, when the mountain awakens, will humanity have learned enough from the land's geographical history? The history of Washington shows that geography isn't the backdrop of the story. Geography is the story. It creates floods and deserts, rainforests and arid lands, atomic bombs and apple orchards, a war over a pig, and bridges that float on a lake. Every human decision here, whether drawing a border, building a dam, or rebuilding a city after a fire, has been a reaction to an unchangeable geography. And Washington continues to be rewritten every day by the tectonic plates still moving below, by the rivers that still flow, by the clouds that are still blocked by the Cascades and forced to release their water. The map of Washington may look static, but nothing here truly stands still.